Tonight for our Knowledge Friday, we are obviously joined by Jennifer and Mark, who in this august company needs no introduction, but since it is pro forma, I want to mention a little bit about who they are and the great collaboration that we had with them. I think everybody knows that we are here surrounded by the bicycles that come from the Bicycle Museum of America in New Brenham, Ohio. They leave on the 13th. They'll be in view until the 10th. So if there are any bike lovers in your lives, please, please, please tell them to come down soon. The bikes are extraordinary. It was great fun to select them. It's all about comfort and speed, so please come down and spend some time with them. To complement and further enlarge that conversation, Mark and Jennifer were so generous to lend us their eyes and their minds to curate this selection of photography, which really extends this idea of the place of bicycles in our lives. And a special thanks goes to Jennifer, because Jennifer came up with the word ubiquitous in the title of our exhibition. And we're very grateful for that. It's a great word. So that's how collaborations work. So without further ado, obviously we all know that Jennifer spent many years at Magnum. Her expertise in photography, as well as her previous experiences in the gallery world, have led her here to us, and also to her independent projects with Tripp Projects. And Mark, who started off more in the business side of the world, but after 9/11 really did that amazing project, and I'm going to have to put on my glasses to make sure I get the title correct. Forgive me. Sorry, that was very loud. Yes. Here is New York, a democracy of photographs, which was really a wonderful, wonderful project that we'll hear more about. Obviously, after that, Mark was with Magnum, where, sorry, this is the thing, I can't see you with the glasses on. At Magnum, where he did so much, and he will talk to us about so much of that work, including the placing of the archive, which is something that's so, so important. And obviously that then led him to the ICP and the extraordinary work that he did there, building the new building, which is really just amazing. And I look forward to hearing more about that. So we're here as friends and neighbors and colleagues for this just really wonderful summation of your very generous work with us. And with that, I'd like to turn over the microphones to you, but I would really just like to say thank you for everything we've done over the last few months and for being here tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd like to thank Sarah and the entire team of the church, which is an extraordinary team. And you think when you come outside the city, you know, that the level might be a little bit less than the level that you get in the city, but I will tell you the level here is higher than the experience that I've had in the city. So it's just an incredible team, absolutely incredible team. And as a community, we are so fortunate to have the church here, because the quality of work that is shown here, exhibition cycle after exhibition cycle, talks, including our talk, but normal talks are exceptional, and to have that talent is amazing. But before we start, there's two announcements. One, I want to thank you so much for coming out tonight, because we know we are competing against the gingerbread house making tonight at the Sag Harbor Elementary, and I know that most of you had signed up, so thank you for coming here instead. And then second, the first picture you see is a picture of Elliot Erwitt, and I'm kissing Elliot Erwitt, but Elliot Erwitt just passed away 2 days ago, 95, so, you know, very good run. But he was a gentleman. He was a master image maker. He was the most modest person you could meet. I just loved him. Jennifer just loved him. Our kids loved him. He's East Hampton as well as New York. He was president of Magnum Photos. And I just wanted to tribute to Elliot. And you'll see some of Elliot's work as we go through. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Thanks. Okay, so I think we were both going to speak a bit about how we came to photography. I studied photography in school, in college, and studied a lot of the Magnum photographers. I studied the history of photography as well as photography as a practice, because I thought I was going to become a photographer. But somewhere along the way, I realized that I much preferred digging deep into these photographers and who they were and why they did what they did. I loved meeting photographers. I loved visiting their studios, working with them. And my studies brought me to LA. I started working in an art gallery there that was about 60% art, 40% photography. And I represented a number of photographers there at Craig Kroll Gallery. And then decided I needed to go back to school. So I left again for the East Coast, which is where I'm from, and went to Savannah College of Art and Design to get my degree. And there, my mentor, who was a fantastic photographer, was very good friends with a lot of the Magnum photographers and recommended that sort of be my next step based on my experience, having already been in the gallery world, had a sort of a professional career, and then just sort of wanting to get back, but to something with more meaning in my mind than just being in a gallery. That felt just a little more deep. So that brought me to Magnum Photos in New York, where I then worked with and for so many of my, at the time, just heroes. And it was such an immense honor and continued education, really, to, I mean, just be with these greats, these talents, they had such an amazing grasp on the world, and they had this talent to show us the world in such poignant ways, as you can see from these remarkable images. And that's also where I met Mark.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
I would like to just jump in here and ask you, I mean, Magnum is an extraordinary and unique organization. What was it like to join, and what were the things that really surprised you in working there?
Ooh. I'm not sure. I mean, it was amazing to come and be a part of it. It was very exciting. It was so stimulating. It was just, as I said, sort of a constant education. These photographers had experienced so much, but continued experience. I mean, Elliot, when I got there, was still working very, very much, and he was already in his 70s. And just their accessibility, I think, is kind of what surprised me a little bit. So we've stopped looking at the Magnum imagery.
I can just jump in, and I'll tell the audience something personal about how we sort of met quickly.
God.
Jen, as she told the story, came to New York to be an intern, even though she was way overqualified to be an intern. And the person that I had running the department at the time came to me and said, "We have an intern that is more qualified than I am, and I think we should hire her." But as Sarah said, my business background jumped in, and I said, well, we have her on a 3-month internship, so maybe we don't have to pay her quite yet. So I interviewed Jan, and she was definitely more qualified than the person running the department. And so we ended up hiring her on an internship for 2 more months. And then she began to work as an employee, which is probably illegal, and I probably shouldn't admit that. But
That is all true.
that is how it goes.
And I was more qualified than the lovely woman that I started working with. So I started at Magnum, and my very first project after my internship ended, as soon as I was being paid, I flew down to Caracas, Venezuela, to oversee the installation of an Henri Cartier-Bresson exhibition. at the museum, the Museum of Bella.
This is day
Big Art
2 at
Museum
Magnum.
there. Yeah, that was not day 2 at Magnum. That was me in the archive. We were there till very late at night. But at Magnum, it was amazing because I was working with these exhibitions. I was overseeing installations in major museums. I was working with the curators of those exhibitions, but I was also doing the commercial side. So I was selling prints. I was in charge of all the collectors' prints and trying to build a collector base for Magnum that most of the Magnum photographers were selling their work through galleries. And if Magnum sold their prints, Magnum would get all of the money. So essentially the photographers would get all of the money instead of a 50-50 split. So my goal was to get 50%
And now she's doing NFTs.
going straight, no, not at all, I'm not on that bandwagon. Going straight into the pockets of the photographers, and if it was a contemporary print, the other 50% went back to Magnum, which would continue their assignments, continue their work, continue their archive, so it all 100% went to supporting the artists. So that kind of got me back into the selling world and back into the commercial world, because I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. However, Magnum didn't have a gallery space, so what you're seeing is lots of booths and photo fairs that I curated little mini exhibits in. I loaned spaces, we borrowed spaces all over the city. We would do pop-up exhibitions. We worked with different partners, with Saatchi & Saatchi, with Mandarin Oriental, with Gramercy Park Hotel. We sort of did mini exhibitions everywhere we could. And I created ads. I designed advertisements to put in all the different art magazines to let people know, come to the source, come to Magnum Photos, buy your imagery here, build your collection here. I also did a lot of research with curators at various museums. My territory was really North and South America, so curators would come to us and I would go through archives of the photographers, either in their homes or at the Magnum archive, and help them find imagery that they might be looking for to add to their collections. So yeah, I mean, I kind of wore multiple hats. It was really amazing, and I traveled all over. This was an installation. I worked with photographers on installations for various exhibitions, so this was part of the Global Fund Access to Life exhibition we did, where we sent 8 photographers around the world to take photos, and each photographer had their own unique vision, and each photographer, we worked together to, this was in the Corcoran in DC, to make sure that their vision was seen in this specific venue. So in each venue, that would have to change because the walls were different, the rooms were different, they had a different feel, but you always wanted to put your own, their own feeling in it. So that exhibition then moved to Rome. We did it at the Arapacis in Rome, and it had a completely different feel, but still got the same message across.
And
anyway.
this raised an enormous amount of money.
It did. It raised how much?
$1 billion.
$1 billion.
That went
Yes.
to?
This is amazing.
This was Mark's project.
Look, I have a pointer.
I just helped with the exhibition.
This man here. First time ever using the pointer at the church. This is the Global Fund. The Global Fund is funded by the G20, and they fight TB, malaria, and AIDS. And they have a novel concept. They go to a country and they say, we're going to give you $100 million, and we want you to reduce AIDS, for example, by 20%. If you do, we're going to give you $300 million. However, what was amazing was they had amazing charts of numbers and facts, but no images. So we proposed that we could send photographers to 9 countries around the world, and they would go and photograph people getting treatment, and then they would go back again, and then they would see what has happened to them, and we would do an exhibition. And we would do those exhibitions in countries just before they voted on giving money to the Global Fund. And so what happened was, and this is in Italy, but it went to Japan. The Prime Minister of Japan was supposed to he had 15 minutes to look at the show. He stayed for 45 minutes. At the UN General Assembly, he mentioned the exhibition, and instead of the $200 million he was giving to the Global Fund, he gave $500 million. So the Global Fund attributed this exhibition that went to about 12 different countries, $1 billion more than they anticipated in raising, because they felt it had such an impact. And so when people say the power of imagery, well, it's not, can it really make a difference?
Yes. Yes,
This was a great example of that.
Yeah, well done. This was Magnum Cinema, very large Magnum exhibition. I curated a selection of the imagery to go to Dubai. So I flew to Dubai. That was me at Art Dubai. One of the openings. You can go faster. We did a red carpet opening there. Then back to New York for another exhibition. This was at an AGM where all the photographers would come together, and we'd have to describe what we'd been doing, why they should pay me or us, what I was doing for the year, what I had done for them, what exhibitions we did, how much money I made, how many prints we sold, all of that. This was one of my final projects I did at Magnum, which Mark and I conceived of together. This was the Magnum Mark, which was all about Magnum's mark, basically, in history, but also the markings of the Magnum prints. And this was a print map that our master printer used. Magnum always had their own dark room in their office with a master printer. He took all of their, these were his maps, and this was how he would work in the darkroom to make these beautiful collector's prints, these gelatin silver prints that people would buy. This is what we like to call the Magnum effect. That's me and a colleague after, I think, towards the end of an AGM, an annual general meeting. But we like to say at Magnum that, I was there 7.5 years, but Magnum years are like dog years. So it felt like about 30, 35, 36 years. Anyways, it was an amazing experience. And after I left Magnum, I worked with a number of photographers to organize their archives, help them get them organized, get them in order. Lots of studio visits, working with artists, young and old, on corporate projects, placing work in, hotels and various collections, corporate collections, private collections, and I'm still doing that today. And then this was actually me preparing, curating imagery for this exhibition, sort of a behind the scenes this summer, laying out prints of all the possible images and pulling out what we were going to.
The difference is if you curate in the Hamptons, you can not wear shoes. You can see.
Those are my feet.
That's how you can tell.
Anyways, so that brings us pretty much to today, where we were lucky enough to be invited by Sherry to come and curate the photos to go with these amazing bicycles that were curated by Eric. And working together, I would say, with Sarah and Eric and Sherry in these meetings, Sherry is not a curator. She was very, very clear about, but we had these amazing collaborative experiences in our little meetings when I'd bring in our slideshow and these are the 50 images I want to do. And they're like, okay, well, you really only need we need 10. We got a budget for 10. Okay, so we'd okay, let's go through what's our top 10 we can't live without, and it'd be 30. It's okay, so we had lots of discussions.
And by the way, Eric rode his bike to every meeting.
He did.
Just so you know. I think you can feel that in the curation.
And Mark rode me in our bucket bike.
And we have a bucket
many of
bike,
our meetings.
and we tried to show off to Eric. I don't think he bought it.
Anyway, so that's my life in photography thus far. Yeah, that's us here.
And I would say that we had laid out everything, and measured everything, and then you get into the space and you start hanging, and then you change everything.
Well, yeah, space changes everything, so.
Okay, so now I'll tell you how we intersect and my path. And as Sarah said, I'm coming from a slightly different way. I came from the business world. And then I was working at a .com in the 2000s, which was .comming. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. And when 9/11 happened, you just felt like you had to do something, and you wanted to try to do something. I got involved with this space on Prince Street. The person who owned the space was about to sign a lease. Agnes B. He was about to sign a lease on September 12th with Agnes B, and obviously that didn't happen. And he was sitting in his shop, and he noticed someone put a Trade Center picture on the window, and people were crowding around. So this led to this idea that we could have a call to action and ask people to bring in their pictures, and then we would print the pictures on the spot, and then we would hang the pictures up, and for $25 you could buy a picture, and the proceeds would go to the Children's Aid Society and children that were affected by 9/11. And we thought at the time maybe we could raise $1,000, or we'll see. But what happened was it became an instant success, in that a word-of-mouth success. The show was, I would say, one of the first crowdsourced exhibitions in which people were coming in, but then because they had work in the show, then other people came, and then other people came. We had 2,000 people lined around the block every single day for a year. We had a website that had 4 billion hits in the first 4 months. We gave $1 million to charity through $25 sales in 4 months. We made a best-selling book, and the exhibition, here are some of the pictures that came in. The exhibition went to 41 countries. It's the second most seen photography exhibit in the history of photography. The first one being? Family of Man. Wow. Which, by the way, Elliot Erwood has a picture in Family of Man. And this is the way the show is hung in a very cramped storefront on Prince Street, black and white, next to vertical, no names, professional photographers. We reached out to the New York Times. We had amazing photographers. And one of the people involved was Gilles Perez, a Magnum photographer. The street, it was inside the space, but also outside. So people were standing on the outside and looking. And you have to remember the moment of 9/11 and that feeling in New York City. And we were all trying to figure out and ask questions of how could this happen, and what's happening in the world. And this exhibition was trying to answer some of that. This was in Chicago, and it went to many different places. In fact, Jennifer, which I had not met yet, saw it in LA. That's someone that just came from the street. Yeah, he's not looking the same. So then one of the people several of the people in Here is New York were Magnum photographers, and this was such a success that they asked me to come to Magnum. And I think because I didn't have I wasn't a curator, and I wasn't a photo editor, so I didn't have a lot of baggage. So if you were a photographer and I assigned you, but not you, you hated me and you loved me. But if I didn't do any of that, you didn't know who I was, and I could actually speak truth. And they listened, which was surprising. At every meeting at the AGM, and I'll tell a very quick story about how you get into Magnum. When I was there was 4 offices: New York, London, Tokyo, and Paris. Paris being the biggest. This is in Paris. Each office would make selections of photographers that they really liked, and they thought, this is a great photographer, they're going to really be doing amazing work. So they would put forward in front of this group to evaluate whether they should join Magnum. So if you make it past that round, and by the way, each year they would take maybe 2 photographers, globally, maybe 2 photographers, they would accept as a nominee. So you think you've made it because you're now nominee status, but no. 2 years later, you come back and you show another portfolio of work. And if the photographers say, oh, this person really is doing what we thought and is improving their work, you become an associate. And if you're an associate, you're not in Magnum yet. but you're feeling good. You are feeling good. You've gotten past the second hurdle. 2 years later, you come back, and now you are up for membership. And then this same group looks, and they see if you are progressing, if they like where you're going, and then you become a Magnum member, or you're kicked out. So it's pretty brutal. And I've seen people go to the bar in the morning and cry, and it's terrible. But the photographer, I'll point him out with my pointer, right there, Hiroji Kuboto, a Japanese photographer. He said, his advice to photographers is, listen, you're a nominee, you say nothing, you say nothing, you say nothing. You become associate, you say nothing, you say nothing, you say nothing. You become member, you say fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. So I pass that advice on. Magnum was started in 1947. What I love about Magnum is it's really like the first photo union. And you have here Robert Capa, George Rogers, Shim, and there is Cartier-Bresson. And this is Elliot Erwitt speaking at Magnum's 60th anniversary. Magnum was founded, not in Paris, but in New York, in the cafeteria of MoMA. And so for the 60th, we had a big party there. They'd already just had their 70th a few years ago. But it was really a union, and they felt that if we could come together, we could fight against Life magazine and Time and all the publications, and we could control our own IP. And if we can control our own stories, then we have the freedom to not just come and drop in and do a photo assignment and leave, but we can stay there for weeks and weeks and weeks and really understand, the world that we're trying to photograph. And it had a practical reason, because then you could have secondary sales. So that meant that if you went on an assignment for Life magazine, you could sell your work to Paris Match or Le Monde as a secondary sale, so there was more income for the photographer. So it was a very, I think, fantastic vehicle for photography at the time. And it has grown and grown and grown, but there has been a fraction in Magnum from the very beginning, because Robert Capa, the great legendary war photographer, his photography was good, but the fact that he was running towards the bullets made his photography great, right? But Cartier-Bresson was the master. And so you had this sort of art fraction, and you had this real pure photojournalistic side. And that's the tension that was inside of Magnum. And that's what I absolutely loved inside of Magnum, to see this tension and these fights that spilled out, because they actually did almost lead to physical altercations several times. This is Susan Meiseles in the New York office talking to staff and students, and I just wanted to echo Sarah that next week Lindsay and Susan will be talking, and then you can come right to the source and hear directly from Susan her process and her thinking, and Lindsay her process and what it takes to go out in the world and really make an important work. So I was at Magnum, my boss was Robert Capa. But then I got the call from Cornell Capa and ICP. So I feel like I was just going from one Kappa to the other Kappa. Indention servant here. And when I got to ICP needed a building. It had been looking for a building for 20 years. It was trying to put the school and the museum back together again. And I took an approach of a 2-phase, 3-phase, 4-phase approach, in which I said, we can't do this all at once, but we're gonna start small and hopefully build from there. So the first space that we got was on the Bowery. And what's important to me was that we had a space that was really connecting directly to the street. So even though you had an exhibition space, I really wanted to feel that the public could go right into the space. And when you go right into the space, you have a book nook, and you'd have activities that were happening in the space, cafe, and talks. So the dialogue wasn't just inside the walls, but what was, again, sort of spilling out. But this was sort of phase one, and what we really wanted to do was get a much bigger space, and then the dream was to have a full building that we could have the school and museum. And so I was at ICP for 9 years, almost 9 years. And I don't know what the dog relationship of that is, but this was the dream to build the building. And then, yes, we did it. We built this building, which is now on the Lower East Side. So we just kept on going east. The next building, I'm sure, will be in the river. But again, a space that is glass frontage out onto the street, and having a conversation, having a dialogue with the public. And I love this shot just because you can kind of see that relationship. And then just very quickly, I was talking to Sarah about where we are now in photography, and everyone's an image maker, and what does it mean, and now AI. An important fact that Adobe, which has a stock licensing, is licensing more AI images than they are actual images, and worse than that, more Israel-Gaza pictures as AI images than actual real images. So to me, I'm just like, oh my God. But in 2010, in 2020, 2020, just 7 weeks before the pandemic just wiped us all out, we opened our new space. And one of the things that we did in our opening exhibition was we did a thing on deepfake. And we had this artist basically take the 1979 movie The Warriors. I don't know if you know this movie, but there was all these different gangs in New York. There was an all-black gang, and all women's gang, a mixed race gang, and they had different sort of fiefdoms and different territories. So we projected on these walls, and as you came into the space, you gave a little information about yourself, and you didn't know this, but it took your picture at the same time. And then, as you went through the space, it started to deep fake your face onto some of the characters in the gangs. So depending on what information and who you were, you might end up, that's me, you might end up in the Brooklyn gang or in the New York City gang and all of that. And the whole point is that, and I think a space like the church here is to have these conversations and to, push and prod, and sometimes they're uncomfortable, but they're important conversations to have. I was happy because I spent so much time looking at construction and looking at empty spaces, and then finally to see people in it was very rewarding. This is a William Klein exhibition. I just wanted to show you, the space actually is a real space, not just deep fake. And then I too ended up in the archive, which is amazing. Jen and I, we have this whole, we end up in the same place. So, and I can talk about the archive later, but I thought we could get into the conversation.
I think the archive is an important place to start because as an art historian who is not an expert on photography, it would seem to me that there have been deep-seated conversations in photography which are about art versus kind of documentation, commercial versus fine art, and now we're looking at film versus digital, and real versus AI. So what is the extraordinary future of photography going to be, in both of your opinions?
In my opinion, someone asked me about Magnum, and I said, Magnum's like a cockroach in that it will always survive. And then I further elaborated that because the expression on their face was horrified. And I said, every day an artist wakes up, they have a question, and they really want to try to understand that question. And they're going to use a pencil or a paintbrush or a camera or a video camera. And they're going to knock their heads against the wall, and they're going to go again and again and again. And finally, they're going to come back with something. And I can't tell you if that is going to be a digital form, if that is going to be a physical form, but I do know that people are going to go out in the world and engage in the world and create something and come back with something. And so I have high hopes that that is going to continue. I can't tell you, what the final form will be, but that's why we're at the church. That's why we're in spaces to look at that and examine and to see what will have an impact and what won't. So I'm always, when people say, at one point at Magnum, people said, "Are your photographers shooting digital or film?" And I said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It just matters that they are going out into the world and they're engaging, and that's all. And I think that will continue.
Jennifer.
I mean, I agree 100%. And just in terms of photography lasting, I guess, and staying relevant maybe, or AI versus real photographs. I think that like the photographs on these walls are sort of testament to a good photograph. It's gonna last. It just stays. Whether you've studied photography, whether you know anything about photography at all, when you see a good image, it speaks to you. Oh, that's a really good picture. Like when I took a picture of my kid's bike, it looked nothing like that. But so I think that a well-crafted image lasts and will always speak to like the people 50 years from now or 100 years from now. I don't think that's going to go away. So
we dream in black and white and still imagery.
What initially drew you to photographic images, and has your aesthetic of photography changed over your career with all of the changes you have both seen?
For me, photography, was the most accessible art. I did not grow up in a household with art. My parents don't understand art. They don't, when I said I wanted to go to art school, they thought I was mad. So I put myself through art school. But they're like, how are you gonna make a living studying art? But for me, and art was kind of tough for me to get my head around, but photography was always accessible. And for me, I feel like I didn't grow up with art in my house, but I grew up with photo albums. We always had photos around. We always had a camera. And photographs are so tangible, and so, I guess accessible is the best word. And that was really my in. And then in terms of an aesthetic, I've always been drawn towards beautiful imagery or quirky imagery, or things that make me laugh. But that's really never changed. I think that once I started seeing more photography and sort of seeking it out, I was amazed at what photography could do. It wasn't just pictures of your friends and your family and it wasn't just portraits, it wasn't just snapshots. There was this whole other language that if you really knew what you were doing, you could tell a whole story. So for me, it became so magical. And then when I studied it and being in the dark room and all of that, the magic of the alchemy of it really blew me away as well. So I just find it a magical yet simple, accessible art form.
I mean, they say about photography that it's a universal language. For me, I grew up being, dyslexic, and so I felt that images is something that I could get immediately, and also it was something that I could communicate. One funny story at the Magnum meetings, Magnum photographers you never see them without a camera. They always have a camera wherever they are. They also, I think, are incredibly bored in meetings. So when I had my first meeting, I did a PowerPoint presentation, and I made sure to do a lot of visuals because I thought they would respond and could understand, a chart more than, just numbers. And so what I thought was hysterical was that every time I showed a chart and I pointed to the chart, I'd hear because they always had their cameras, and they were always, just taking pictures of things. And the tension of the next chart, or we're going down, So, but to answer the question in terms of imagery, I find the images that are not straight, the ones that are like, that draw you in, that you're a little confused at first, but then you want to go back to it, and you can go back to it again and again and again. I find those to be the most compelling. And in this world where we're all seeing something on I think it's something like 10,000 images a day on your phone and Instagram and all of that, I still, I'm very happy when I see something that is not an Instagram picture, something that's very, that feels very different, and usually that is done by a professional photographer, that there are some layers and there's some depth to that work. And it really does kind of scream, so.
And I mean, that's kind of one of the interesting things, again, about this constant dichotomy in photography. I mean, if we think about the rise of someone like Martin Parr and the idea of the snapshot aesthetic, I mean, we came out of a kind of formalism into a snapshot, and all of a sudden that felt fresh. And now we're so inundated with snapshots that maybe the formal just takes on much more weight. In talking about this show, both of you have talked about how the medium, but also the subject of the bikes was immediately relatable. And I think that's something really interesting, because you did select an international selection of works. Can you talk a little bit about that instant kind of recognition of the bicycle as an object and also as a photographed object?
I mean, there's 2 bikes to every car, right? Is that right?
I think
four
it's
bikes. 4 bikes to every car.
In the world.
Yeah, so I think the ubiquity of the bicycles, I mean, there is something
everywhere.
that everybody can relate to a bicycle. And so there's this sort of, the floor is a common amongst everyone. And then, so I think we started with this, and then we went to the photography. And sorry.
Oh, well, I mean, everyone loves bikes. I think that even if you don't ride a bicycle regularly, or haven't since you were like 10 years old or something, if you did ride it when you were a kid, you still know that feeling. You still remember that excitement of being on your bike and the freedom and the going fast and, whatever. So I think there's that sort of, if you've ridden a bike, that's just immediate. And, once you ride a bike, you never forget. But also, if you don't ride a bike, there's still, I think they're exciting. People are excited, like, by the idea of the bike. There's this romantic notion, I think, that goes along with a bicycle in a lot of ways. Plus, it's just very practical. I don't know, I just think, again, the bicycle itself is so accessible, and so every man, every woman, every being.
Yeah, and a lot of the photographers that are in this show are, they're doing their stories. They're trying to tell their stories, and they're doing the work. And I think the bicycle comes up because it is so part of so many people's lives.
It's in every culture. It's in every country. It's high. It's low. It breaks all the boundaries in some ways. I mean, you could have a really nice bike that costs thousands of dollars, or you could have, somebody's hand-me-down bicycle that you got for free. You can pick up a used bike for $20. I mean, it's everything. So.
And also like the diversity of the photographers in this show, and I think that when you come to a show like this, some people will just see a picture of a bicycle. And then others will sort of look at the bicycle, the picture that will make an impact, and some will read the labels, and they'll say, oh my God, I can't believe they have this one or that one. So I think this show will appeal to many different levels, and that's what we're trying to do. You might just like the picture of the bicycle, but you also might understand the history of the medium and the types of photographers that we picked in this show. I think there's a clean line of the medium.
Can you talk about what it is like to curate together? I mean, because essentially...
Our divorce lawyer is sitting in the front row.
You always look very united in our talks.
I mean, I guess...
I have to say, it was very collaborative in that Jen starts with sort of the research,
Yeah.
and we talked about themes, and there were so many different ways you could go in
Yeah.
this show. We then had to talk practicalities of timing and how do we get everything here and framed and all of that. But we talked about like, oh, well, I know this photographer and I know this gallerist and we know this and she knew these people, and so we just kind of divided and conquered.
Yeah, I mean, I did start with the research and really went down lots of different rabbit holes of what we could do with photography, and looking at the Library of Congress and I was looking at historic imagery because I just knew they were getting all these amazing historic bicycles. But then it became pretty clear, I think, that we needed to shift the focus and not try. I mean, we needed more time to get too deep. So I was like, let's just think about because working in photography for so long, like you immediately get certain images pop into your head when you think about bicycles and photographs. So I started with those, and then I just sort of went from there. I went into Magnum's archive because there's just so much there, and I know it fairly well. And I know a lot of the photographers, and we knew we could get in touch with them. But we branched out from there. We sort of used that as a base, and then reached out to local photographers that we knew, which was really fun, and had them like, we're doing a show on bikes. Do you have anything? And pretty much everyone does. Like, they're like, I don't know, do I? But then when you start looking, you find them because they're everywhere. So even sometimes, whether you knew you had it or not, it turns up. So that was really fun, and I think it was fun. It was fun for me to discover some works I had never seen before by photographers I was very familiar with, and it was also fun for some of the photographers to discover images they didn't even realize they had, or that they had never really focused on. So I thought that was really fun.
So we're going to want to open this up for questions, but before I do that, we're going to ask each of you to pick one work in the show and defend it.
The blue one.
Yeah, you're not getting off with that.
That was a joke. Do you want to go first? I mean, they're all amazing. You could just pick one and I would defend it or, speak about it. But
I hate to say like favorite images, but you could ask me about any image and I can tell you why we picked that image and why this image is important. I mean, this picture here is, this is a very, it was unknown photographer in Africa.
Seydou Keita.
Seydou Keita.
Keita?
And
Keita.
And he had a business of taking portraits of people, and you could rent things while you took your picture. So you paid him to take a picture, but you could also rent a watch, or you could rent a jacket, or you could rent this bicycle. And why is that? It's because people were taking pictures to send back to their family, and they wanted to say, hey, I'm doing well. Look, I have a watch, I have a bicycle, I have this. And I just think that if you could go down every single one of these pictures and there's going to be a different story and a different reason why we sort of included this work in the show.
I mean, it's so hard. I mean, I keep thinking about the ones because I'm sitting right in front of them, but I think of those two kappas at the top. There are two kappa images side by side on the mezzanine level. There is no bicycle in the shot. Both photographs, there's no bicycles. There's just a crowd looking this way, bunch of kids, some grown-ups as well, and they're in front of a bicycle shop. And then the next picture, they're all looking this way. So it's the implied bicycle, and they were all watching the Tour de France. So they were all excitedly waiting for them to pass, the cyclist to pass, and then it's them watching them go off into the distance. So I just think that's really hilarious, the absence of the bicycle. I don't know, that's two images. But there, I mean,
we're
there
gonna,
are so
we're gonna
many.
walk through it with people.
Yeah, we can walk through.
Could we, questions from the audience before we do a walkthrough? Yeah, there's one there.
Oh, hi, April.
I was just thinking that it's kind of interesting, the history of photography and the history of the bicycle are relatively coincidental because they were both kind of invented around the same time. I don't know exactly what the proper dates are, but there's a kind of an optimism about technology that I think we're losing at this point because of all the shit that we've got ourselves in at this point. But when you look at the bicycles, they're so enlivening, and the photographs, this is just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful curation. I remember the first time I really looked hard at the bicycle race pair of photographs, and I was like so flipped out. It really, I mean, there's like a deep joy, and there's also a deep gravity in so many of them. But I just wanted to thank you. And was there any thought about the coincidental histories being similar, or?
I mean, what I thought was interesting about the bicycle is that it, in terms of technology, that it sort of was, and this is what the show is showing, the innovation in the bicycle sort of kind of reached to the point, but basically it's sort of maxed out. It's like the most efficient, a wheel, a chain, a seat, like that's all you need, and it got better, and maybe you can do carbon and you can do all these kinds of things, and now you can add electric, but basically it hasn't changed after a certain period of time, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And with photography too, and going back to Elliot, I've seen him do a slideshow, and in the same slideshow, I can see an audience cry, and then I can see an audience laugh. And it's just through these human moments that he was able to capture. And I think all of the photographers that are in this show have had that ability to take work and really make us have either empathy or really connect on a human level. And I think that's one thing that sort of pieces all of this together.
Well, maybe it's also kind of a shared modernity because they both started at a certain time that was industrial, and we have to place ourselves as a culture that emerged from that, but both of them have come along with us.
Right.
And it's all kind of plus ça change because, a lot of innovations have happened, et cetera. Now, digital photography, however you want to look at it, or electric bikes, but still the greatness of them is the invention, and then in photography, the poignancy and the range of emotion. Anyway, it's such a great show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question. Does anybody else? You guys do, okay. Can I ask first?
Yeah.
So this is Knowledge Friday, as you guys know, and
Sorry.
one of the you've dispensed with us all your knowledge, which is incredible, and the incredible one of the things that I'm going to say is so wonderful about this program, and that's not to be immodest because I didn't start it, April did, is there are so many unbelievable people in this community who we have yet to hear their stories and to think about the things they've contributed to the world. And these are the people that you see next to yourself wherever on the shops or at the church. So I'm so grateful, I think we're all so grateful to hear your story and would just love to hear you very briefly talk about how you wind up in Sag Harbor after all of this. Like, I raised $1 billion for, through photography for people around the world, and now I'm going to live on 114.
Right. Well.
Well, as I said, I was born in the city, Upper West Side, and born and raised city person, but very fortunate that my parents had a house in Noyak. And to me, that was the escape pod. And that even though I loved the city and it was amazing, I just loved coming here and getting that recharge. When Jennifer and I were dating, which is another story, I said to Jen, who wasn't from the city, like, we have to find something out of the city because it's gonna just crush you, and so we have to find, just again, escape pod. So, but we were also looking for something in Brooklyn at the time. Anyway, long story short is that we found a place in Sag Harbor, and we got this wonderful place in Sag Harbor. Jen found the house.
I did,
Jen
but
found it.
living here full-time, I think, was my COVID silver lining.
Yes,
Because we came out full-time
during
with
COVID.
COVID and have not gone back.
Do you miss your lives in the city, or are you?
Yes, no.
No. Do you want to leave it at that and move on to
well,
another question?
I'm going to let our divorce lawyer
Feel free.
talk about who gets what.
We do have 2 small children who are in the schools here, and they are very happy and thriving, and they walk to school. And it's just such an amazing community. And for me, I grew up in a small town outside of Atlanta, so outside of it, close to a big city, but not in the big city. So I really like, I like being close enough to get there when I want to get there and have access to it, but not be in it with my kids and on the sidewalk and all that.
And are you guys both intending to further have careers within the infrastructure of photography?
Yes.
Yes,
Great.
ideally.
Question?
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on something, Mark, you said earlier about the Magnum photographers, and
Do you want to apply?
I'm sorry? Those that were, working more in the artistic photography realm and those that were, photojournalists. Why was it felt that they couldn't coexist, or why was there conflict between them?
That is a great question. And I think, people take positions. And so to many photojournalists, true photojournalists, they felt there was one way to tell a story. I told this to Sarah before, but it's a great story. That the greatest example of this is when I got to Magnum, and they have these annual meetings where all the photographers get together and they have these big fights. Philip Jones Griffiths, who did one of the seminal books on Vietnam called Vietnam Inc., and I really think it actually changed people's perspective of the war. He was a photojournalist, and he felt inside of Magnum, the only photographers that Magnum should take are photojournalists and image makers that are going to take important pictures. And he felt that art photography, he used that in a very slang way, but he felt that was here today and gone tomorrow. Like, it might be popular now, people might be excited, but in the end of the day, no one's going to remember it because it's a fad. So that was his position. So then you have someone like Martin Parr, who was doing incredibly well in the gallery world. He used the palette of commercial photography for social documentary. But at the same time, you saw the American Tushy picture over there before, that he sells well in the gallery world, even though he is making social commentary. Philip, and more Philip than Martin, but Philip was so fundamentally opposed to Martin Parr that at the meetings wherever Martin Parr would sit, Philip would sit on the opposite side of the table. And whatever Martin Parr said, he would say the exact opposite. So much so that on his deathbed, the last email that he sent, which I have, he said, I've been in Magnum 50 plus years, blah, blah, blah. You're my family. I love you all. Goodbye. Philip. P.S. Martin Parr should not be in Magnum. He died 2 days later. 2 days later. That was the last email he sent out to everybody. So, hey, the conviction is there. And when you go to these meetings, that intensity is there. But that was wonderful, that you had this kind of passion.
But I do think it's important to note that all of the Magnum photographers, whether they considered themselves pure photojournalists or, a bit more artful and were really trying to make art, they all considered themselves socially concerned documentary photographers. Even the photojournalists didn't necessarily sometimes call themselves photojournalists, they called themselves documentary photographers, and they were socially concerned. So they were always trying to tell the story of the world around them, which really grew out of World War II, after World War II, when it was founded. So.
The picture that was taken, I imagine, on a rooftop somewhere in Paris, maybe. What year was that? Just curious.
2008.
So there's a lot of old white men there in that picture.
It's Magnum.
Yeah. So I was just curious, so if that was, what is that math? However many years ago, 15 years ago.
So
is that changed?
It has changed.
It has changed, but I will tell you, there was a lot of resistance inside of Magnum that they knew that there was very few women and very few people of color and very few. They knew that, but they also did not want to just take someone that was a lesser image maker or storyteller just to check a box, So there was a lot of fights inside of Magnum about that. However, I will say, to be fair, systemic racism and systemic anything is in the system, So, there were not opportunities for many people sometimes to get the kind of experience that some of these white photographers had. Photo editors were white, they assigned people.
And also pure numbers in the photojournalism world, as you know, Lindsay. It's probably changed a lot now, but in the 80s, in the 70s, in the 60s, there were simply fewer women doing that type of work than there were men.
Yeah, and there still is a prejudice about sending a woman into a conflict zone. I mean, Lindsay Odario has said many times that when she was pregnant, she didn't tell, the photo editor that she was pregnant because she didn't want, and she said, if my husband went and died, leave me with, kids at home. So if I go and die, why is it such a big deal? But anyway, there's still a little bit of that. But inside of Magnum itself, yes, I think they have turned a corner in the last, I would say, decade. And there are a lot more women, there's a lot more diversity, and I think you'll see over time that there'll be a balance.
Other questions?
There's a gentleman here in the front.
It's my lawyer.
I'm not a divorce lawyer. I'm actually a professional photographer, but that's okay. My bicycle photo was in the East Hampton Star, but you didn't call me. But I won't hate you. It's okay.
I didn't see it.
I know you wouldn't have. This has really been very great.
But I would like
wonderful, wonderful presentation. I'm very sad about Elliot's loss. His work was just so unique, and he seemed to he did wonderful photojournalism work and yet whimsical artistic stuff as well. I live in Montauk, but my hometown is Memphis, so the Eggleston photo up there is my childhood, and it's just like an amazing curation. Things I'm familiar with, Cartier-Bresson, that's like an idol, just great. But this one, Steve McCurry, I think, yeah. I'd never seen it. The story in that one image is just absolutely amazing. But I also just wanted to say thank you for pointing out all your social activism work and how powerful it has been, because it's very, I don't call myself a photographer anymore, really. I just say I'm an artist, because it's very difficult. Everyone's a photographer now. The reasons I got into it don't exist anymore. And so it's trying to find a path with imagery, but that's not something that, well, I went out and took that, and then the next day someone was there and took the same photo. What's the point? But, so it's really a very thought-provoking presentation and conversation. So just wanted to say, I didn't know what to expect tonight, so thank you very much. It's really been quite wonderful. Thank you.
When we do a walkthrough, there's an Elliot wrote up there that he was working for the tourism board in France, and the picture that they use is a color picture. And Elliot always said, I have two cameras, one which was my commercial and one that's for me. And it was Cartier-Bresson who said, you know, Elliot was a master at doing commercial work, but getting his own work out of it. And he even said himself that he saw images everywhere, and that he could see what was commercial and what he wanted for himself.
Right.
Well, perhaps, why don't we go upstairs and start with the Elliott Kata? Those of you who would like to join us.
Thank
please
you,
do.
guys.
Thank you.